2023 going to look like. And excellent. We got the technical issue solved. Thank you, Morgan or Madeline, whoever got that for us. So with that, we'll go to, and then of course adjourn the meeting. So roughly an hour and a half is what we're looking at for this morning. So we'll get into that first part. Here is the year-to-date quarterly numbers. So year-to-date September, we're up, is the story. 13.6%. So tracking not quite where we were at the end of the year last year, but still double digits, still strong. The US overall 15% up. So we're looking at having at this rate of climb, at this rate of activity, then we're set to do another record year, because last year 3.94 billion for the agricultural products was also a record. Just as comparison, the 5-year average to date, 3.53 billion, of course, with when we finish out 2022, and we talk about that in March, then that average will surely be higher, just by the amounts that are rolling in from last year and of course the finish out of this year. Before we talk about the countries and the product areas, I thought we'd talk a little bit about the exchange rate, because we know that that's one of the challenges that a number of folks are talking about in terms of their business. And although that is a challenge and a headwind, it's been interesting as we see the numbers. You'll see what I'm talking about, that it hasn't necessarily had the impact you would think in this near term, but going onward could do. But what we did was we set the dollar against the local currency, whether it's Canadian dollars, Chinese yuan, Mexican pesos, etc. And as you notice, in just about every instance, the dollar, so what it costs them to buy a dollar is more. And so great news if you're buying products from there, because it makes them cheaper for you if you're importing, if you're traveling. But on the other side of that coin, if you're trying to export, then of course our products are becoming more expensive, and that's had some downward pressure on some of those markets. Mexico, as you'll note, it's actually one of the only ones that actually improved. The dollar dropped a little bit versus where it was in November of last year.
Thanks.
Oops, looks like we got, oh, hey Chuck, got you on. There we go. Good to see you. So we're talking about the exchange rates, and Mexico, although it's improving, that volatility has affected our exports into that market. So they've been down, and over historical patterns, they've been down quite a bit. But that's going to help improve a little bit the exports. In fact, we've seen that in this quarter. Korea starting to actually, the dollar starting to soften a little bit for them. But Japan still quite high, like a 30 plus year high for Japan. So that's going to be a headwind for us. And I included, these are the top 5 markets, by the way: Canada, China, Mexico, Korea, Japan. Put in Europe, because if you took the EU 27 altogether, that's actually our second largest export market for this range of products. Canada is still above even the 27 European countries put together. But again, challenge with the euro getting weaker, and that those prices for those US goods getting higher. So now as we look at the markets with that context in mind, Canada double digits, 22%, quite strong. China still up 10%. Despite that, Mexico up 8%. So that improvement has helped, that as that peso has dropped. I think that's what's helped us out a little bit there. Korea at nearly 23%, even above Canada. And then Japan down a little bit, and they were down, as I remember last time we looked at this, year-to-date Q2. So driving that for Canada, certainly our largest market. Ethanol is beverages, it's called, but ethanol is a big part of that: cereals, dairy, and sauces. So interesting, dairy's up, and we'll talk about that a bit in the product areas. Korea, main drivers: dairy, milk proteins, meat as well, food, and then food products and waste, food waste for food. Oh, looks like we got there we go. Do that mute. By and large, our top five and markets, and they're over 2/3 of the total. The 4 of the 5 are up strong, so that's good news to see, and will help carry us through this fourth quarter of the year, as we've seen year to date. And then as we look by product, dairy is really the winner this time. 37, almost 38% above same period last year, with all the others also up. But looking at everybody's up double digits, and some pretty significant double digits. Korea 72%, Mexico nearly 54%, Japan 53%. Japan, even though everything else is down, dairy's strong there. So those are interesting numbers, good to see. We've needed that in dairy. We've been taking a bit of a beating over last year, and then this year certainly in the first quarter, but last quarter and then the next are certainly catching up. Top 5 countries, as it notes here, 65%. So again, over 2/3 for that category. So good story for dairy so far this year, and we'll see about what the rest of the year might look for us. Meat products went the other direction, so down almost 2%, and just about everybody's down, with the exception of one market, Finland. We've talked about them at other times. Finland's not buying beef or sausages from us; they're buying mink. So that major customer that's in Finland, but that's good for the mink industry, because they've certainly through COVID had suffered, and weak prices and just low shipment numbers. So good to see for that particular industry, and they'll finish out this year strong, which they needed to do. But in the rest of those areas, with the exception of China, everybody else is negative in those top categories. So challenge with meats, of course, that's livestock and genetics, as well as meat cuts and prepared meats, and as well as the animal products such as furs and hides. And genetics and livestock hasn't been hit quite as hard, so it really is more those consumable meat products, let's say, that are affected. Crop products, that's our broadest category. Very wide range of items between grains, forestry products, and the processed foods and beverages within that. So beverages and the prepared vegetables and wood are actually nearly 1/3 of all of what we are looking at in this category. And as we look at the countries, Canada up double digits, so we're looking good in Canada. But Mexico up double digits as well, so that recovering a bit from that strengthening, or the benefit, I guess, of that strengthening peso. China a little bit flat, but still up. Japan down. I think, again, of all the markets, demand is sort of overtaking whatever pushback that the strong dollar might do, with the exception of Japan. I think it really is hitting that market stronger. And we'll go back to dairy, except in dairy, where they seem to have defied the odds on that. Just real quickly, this is the team you would talk to. Jennifer Liu, Lisa Stout, Shirley Acedo, and Luis Santana, for these product areas and geographic markets, as we're looking to go outbound and for the companies and organizations to grow their business overseas. So with that, if there are any questions, just briefly, and then we can also cover more of that in our conversation here at the end of the meeting. But if there are no questions at this point, then I'm going to turn it over to Professor Chuck Nicholson, UW-Madison, to talk about assessing barriers to dairy product exports by small and medium-sized Wisconsin manufacturers. So take it away, Chuck.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, those of you on the call. Pleasure to be here this morning, talking to you from beautiful UW River Falls, where we're having the Dairy Summit, sponsored by the Dairy Innovation Hub. So I appreciate you working me into your program here this morning. So, Mark, you had mentioned that you can somehow magically let me control things. Otherwise, I can just say, hey, can you hit a button? But however you'd like to do it is fine.
Yeah, about that. I don't know that I have, because I don't have host control, so I'm not sure I'm able to do. So why don't we just do it the old fashioned way and just tell me to click.
Okay, you can click.
Thanks. Now, if it'll cooperate, there we go.
Yeah, okay. So I do want to focus primarily on the project description. That was the title of the presentation, but because I am new here in the state of Wisconsin, I thought it might be helpful to give you a little bit of my background and how it relates to the project. Talk a little bit about the objectives and the status of the project, and then there's one other related project on dairy product trade that I'd like to at least bring to your attention. So if you can click again, Mark, thank you for helping me out there. I was hired by UW-Madison, started in January of this year with the support of the Dairy Innovation Hub. And you can see from the pictures on the right, there's a very much younger version of me working in Kenya, but I have a long history of involvement with dairy in the United States, particularly in key dairy states like New York, Vermont, California, and Pennsylvania. Have a long, more than 25-year affiliation with the National Program on Dairy Markets and Policy, which used to be actually the Cornell Program on Dairy Markets and Policy when I worked in New York at Cornell. And then I have extensive experience working in kind of Latin America and East Africa on dairy production and marketing issues. So if you can go ahead now, Mark, to the next. And this is trying to give you a mind-numbing version of how the diverse topics I've worked on related to dairy play out. But for a long time, I have been interested in the impacts of trade policy and exports. And this goes all the way back to my graduate work when I looked at the impacts of NAFTA, particularly with relationship to the potential in Mexico. Have done a number of projects on and off since then that relate to dairy markets inside the United States as well as export markets. So if you can go ahead and hit the next one there, Mark. Okay. So this current project has kind of three main objectives, and it starts from trying to think a little bit about understanding the current status, particularly for some of the smaller and medium-sized dairy product manufacturers in the state, trying to understand their current levels of involvement and their potential interest if they're not already actively engaged. You can go ahead and do that. So one of the things we want to do is try and document a bit better the potential barriers to export market participation by companies that are not already involved or have a relatively small involvement. And one of the things that's a bit of a focal point for me and the project team is really thinking about the extent to which supply chain logistics, which have been a major issue recently, that's been in the news. We've heard a lot about, all of us, I think. And costs are kind of barriers. In addition, we'll have a broader net that we think about other potential barriers as well as other potential solutions to those barriers. You can hit the next one there, Mark. So at the end, what we want to try and do is identify and evaluate and maybe recommend some strategies that could address these barriers. And that might include proposals for things like a dairy export hub or even some kind of combined branding that's a little bit different than what's being done now. So if you can go ahead, Mark, and go to the next one. So at the moment, we're primarily involved in reviewing previous information. There's a lot of things that DATCP and other organizations have already provided in terms of basic background information. You just saw the updates on the current trade status. We've been reviewing that kind of information, as well as having conversations with people about the current state of export logistics for dairy products. You can go to the next of these. Yep, thanks. As a part of that, we really want to understand better the perspective of dairy manufacturers in the state. So we have developed a draft online survey that would assess kind of the current levels of participation and their perceptions about barriers to expansion or getting into the market in the first place. Mark, you can go ahead there. Once we have that information available, we plan to build on that by having a series of interviews and field visits with relevant companies, both those that are already involved in export markets, as well as those that have an interest but maybe have not yet taken the plunge. And we're going to try and use that to help evaluate further the potential as well as the current perceptions about what those barriers really are and what might be done. You can go to the next of those. Yeah. Once we have the information from the surveys, from the review of previous information, from the discussions, interviews, and focus group discussions, we'll bring that together and try and recommend some strategies based on our findings that would help to address the kinds of export barriers that we have been identified by the companies. And then you can do the last of those there. And then we'll plan to organize a workshop to present the finding to interesting external stakeholders, which may include some of you. So the current status on this is we are well underway, but I'd say we're right kind of in the very middle of things. We have begun the review of export promotion programs as well as basic data. We have identified and contacted some key export logistics companies and dairy product manufacturers that have provided us with some initial information. We have developed a draft online survey that I'll shortly be sharing with the folks at DACAP as well as Wisconsin NASS for their input. We also want to pre-test that with some companies with whom we already have existing relationships and see if we're on the right track in terms of questions that people find useful, as well as ones that they can reasonably answer in a relatively short amount of time. Once we have done that and have the results back, then we'll begin the process of interviewing and focus groups with kind of the major players, as well as folks that might want to be involved. The integration part will be ongoing with the steps that we do above, and then ultimately we'll report back a bit further along. The expected reporting on this would be in June of next year. So that's kind of the project time horizon that we're looking at. Okay. And just as an example, we're doing this online survey, and probably a little hard for you to read on whatever screen you're looking at right now, but we really want to try and understand something about what companies are doing in terms of current export volumes. That's kind of the set of things that are on the left there. And then on the right side, we're really thinking about trying to assess some of the different kinds of barriers. For example, Mark was talking about the exchange rates of the US dollar versus currencies in major export markets. That would be one of the things we want to get folks' perspective on in terms of how important they are finding that in their particular business model or business arrangements. Okay, thanks on that, Mark. You can go ahead. Okay, so I'm happy to take questions about the project and actually take suggestions as well, but let me also say a little bit about a related project effort. We are developing a partnership with something that you may or may not have heard of called the International Farm Comparison Network. They are kind of an international organization that's based in Germany. They have an extensive network of people who provide information about dairy production, dairy markets, dairy trade, globally. They do a lot of data collection, but they don't do a lot other than sort of reporting the basic data back to the people who are their members, which include farm organizations, dairy processor organizations, and government organizations throughout the world. So our partnership is designed to actually build on their strong data collection efforts across the world and use that to help us better predict and understand the patterns of trade that we are seeing. To do that, we will use information that we get in collaboration with them to kind of revise and update a global dairy supply chain model that we have developed over a long number of years. And that will actually help us to think about some of the potential in the medium term, maybe 3 to 5 years, for additional changes in export markets for dairy. And also to evaluate sort of shorter term shocks, like what if we had a war between Ukraine and Russia, which might affect the patterns of dairy trade. So if you go back to the next slide, this is actually kind of the last of them. Yeah, so we actually have developed this global dairy supply chain model, initially with some assistance from the U.S. International Trade Commission. And their interest was really in using this to help them think about U.S. trade policy. And in fact, part of the analysis on the dairy side for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement used analysis from this particular model to help think about, in particular, how much restriction should be placed on imports of fat products that are rich in butter fat. So this kind of has been developed over the last 6 to 7 years. You can go to the next of these here. This is actually kind of a global coverage model. You see a little bit on the map there, some of the regions that we've identified. Has extensive coverage of different dairy products down to different concentrations of things like whey protein concentrates. And again, I mentioned that the usefulness that we see in this tool and this partnership with IFCN is that we can do some medium-term kind of projections for export opportunities and evaluate the impacts of shocks of various kinds to dairy product markets globally. And then another thing that we haven't yet done, but can do, is to think about what are the returns to export market promotion activities? Are there things that seem to be more effective or less effective in terms of generating returns to dairy farmers and dairy manufacturers? So I think that's the last of the things that I have to say, but happy to have some questions or comments from the group if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, hey Chuck, it's Chad Vincent from Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin.
Hi, Chad.
I think we need to get together.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I have a team that does, I have a group of folks that does nothing but go out and talk with the dairy processors in the state, largely the cheese guys. And so we're in front of them daily. And we have a lot of direct communications with them in conversations in person, email blasts that go out all the time. So I think we can help you if you want on figuring out the export side. And I've also been in conversations with Torsten from IFCN about how, because at his economic presentation at the Dairy Summit, and that was amazing. And the data that they have, I think, is data that we need to have in the state. So if you're working with them, we should figure out how we make sure we're not stepping on each other.
Sounds excellent, Chad. I really appreciate that. Happy to connect offline and set up some time to chat. I've been meaning to kind of go and talk with you folks anyway, but this is maybe a good push in the right direction.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
Look forward to it.
Chuck, this is Keith Hikus. I just work with Eurus. I'd just throw in that we also work pretty closely with Torsten. I've worked with him for 20 plus years and everything, so know him very well. He serves on an advisory committee for Eurus on some things we're doing. So if we can help in any way, just let me know too, okay?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
That is great to hear. And I know it's a challenge with these surveys, especially to get the number of responses that you need to really make that those data to be significant. So I think that's good that we're connecting with the warm contacts within the organizations to help to be able to move those forward.
Right. I mean, I think with DATCAP and with our help, I mean, once again, I'm sure there will be a lot of people to respond, but I do believe that with the contacts that we have, we could probably get the numbers up significantly.
Yeah, I think that was part of our dissemination strategy, was really to have the state's organizations that can really encourage folks to respond and tell them why this would be important. I think that's going to be crucial to our success with getting enough responses to really be able to lay out the landscape appropriately. So yeah, again, thanks so much for that.
And not to speak for WCMA, but I'm sure that they probably have a few contacts with it.
Yeah, yeah, John's on my list to talk to as well.
Yeah, I think Rebecca might be on the call. At least she was earlier. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know she's aware of it. She's worked quite a bit. And this project is actually part of that export expansion grant program that's part of the overall Wisconsin Initiative for Agricultural Exports. So the first round of that, and of course the second round, as I mentioned earlier, is today's the deadline for the applications, and of course folks who have had the previous grant can actually go for round two on incremental projects and to carry forward their program from the 2 years that the grant is into 4 years by applying for that second round. But one of the challenges that we've had, and we've talked about this in some other meetings, is first of all, knowing just who the exporters are. We work with a number, but we're not necessarily sure we know all of them. But we also have a pretty good indication that of the 200 or so, 240 of companies that would potentially be exporters, that they're cheese makers, that they're dairy product processors, that there's a relatively small percentage of those who are actually exporting. It may be between 20 and 30. So I think this will help us understand what that real number is. And then I noticed in Chuck, in your sample there, that you had some in terms of weights, pounds that are being produced and potentially exporting. So to help us get at that number, which has also been an elusive number for us. So those are some helpful data points, I think, that'll help us better understand this, not just on a dollar basis, but on a unit volume basis, what we're shipping outbound and work through that. And Yeah, seeing a message, and I think actually, let me go to the next slide here. Doesn't have, so Chuck, we can get your contact details out to everybody just to make sure that they'll know how to find you.
Okay, actually, is the chat functional here? Because I can do that if that was.
Yes, it is. Oh, no,
Okay.
not a bad idea, but we'll also make that available for, and
Okay.
actually on your PowerPoint, your contact information is there as well. So you should be able to reach Chad and do that,
Okay.
because I've seen a couple other messages come through.
Okay, I'll put the email there into the chat box if folks, but I can follow up. So great.
So good. Well, what I'll do at this point, unless there are other questions from everybody attending, then, and Chuck, I know you're at the conference there in River Falls, so as long as you're able to stick with us, we're glad to have you, but I understand also if you need to sign out, because I know you've got a presentation to do here pretty shortly.
Yeah, I'll hang in for a few more minutes and then I'll probably drop off in order to get over and get prepared for the other presentation. But thanks so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Good information. We'll look forward to see as you build this project out, what that becomes, and that information that we'll be able to use. And I think not just for exports, but broadly in the industry. So I think it'll be some beneficial work.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much.
Great. Well, we're at the third portion, moving on pretty well this morning, which is the agricultural export projections. And maybe a way to start it off is Katie Sinnott, Vice President for the Global Trade and Investment Division at Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, is on the line with us. And they look at data, export data actually monthly, and they do it across the board for manufactured products as well. As they see the agricultural products, we dig a bit deeper on the agricultural product side. But maybe Katie can talk a bit about where they're seeing export data up till now. And they also just wrapped up a trade mission to UK and Scotland, England and Scotland. And so I think Katie can talk a bit about that and what their findings were from that visit, which again, brought across all the exported products that we do. But there's some tie-ins to agriculture. So I don't know, Katie, are you
I'm here.
with us? Okay, I'm going to stop the share so we can see folks better. There we
Great.
go.
Thanks. I'll just make a few comments. I too have to drop off in about 5 or 10 minutes. But as you heard from Mark, overall export growth has been strong. Our top 5 countries for the state are a little bit different than the ag countries. So the top 3 are the same: Canada, Mexico, China. Germany and the UK round out our bottom of the top 5. We are seeing generally double-digit growth. We're seeing some weakening in China and Germany, going down to single-digit growth. As anecdotal evidence of some weakening in Europe, we're seeing that the impact of the currency really is hurting large capital equipment sales. For example, when we were on our trade venture to the UK, we had several food production equipment sellers, and all of their meetings 2 weeks before we left for the UK were canceled. All of the buyers in the UK had noted that the equipment was too expensive, and the uncertainty that was going on politically in the UK made them hold off on those long-term capital asset purchases. So I think longer term, if the dollar remains strong, we're going to see some impact from that. So on the top product categories, for example, industrial machinery is up by 22%. Within that is harvesting equipment. We've seen a 15% increase of harvesting equipment. As we go down to our second super category would be ag, which Mark covered. Third would be electrical machinery, up by 21%. Medical and scientific equipment still up by double digits, about 12%. There has been some reduction in that because of the impact of COVID. there's less need for the different inputs to the vaccines and whatnot. The one that we saw a significant change in was vehicles and parts. So we've seen an increase, for example, in motorcycle exports of about 88%, but we've also seen a significant decline in tractor exports of about 18%, special vehicles of about 23% down. I think though that overall it's still looking good, because when we look at Canada, for example, 41% of all of our ag products go there. That, that market's up by 22%. And for our fourth quarter, we do believe that exports will continue to grow, but we will see a cooling effect from a long-term strong dollar, I believe. And I'm happy to answer questions or participate in your conversation. Thanks, Mark.
Great, thanks, Katie. It's good to have that perspective across the manufactured side, and that there is some tie-in to what we see on the food products side as well, and agricultural products. So at this point, it's an open forum. So those folks who are on the line, and I guess what we're really looking to do is just get a feel for, not that it's more anecdotal than it is empirical. So to talk about where we think this year is going to end up within your particular industry and business, and what your feeling is for next year, understanding that all predictions, just about all predictions are wrong. They're either too low or too high. So we all understand that, but just to get an idea what the direction is for us. And Larry, you and I talked a little bit as we were starting the meeting. So would you mind maybe kicking it off, just talking a bit about what you're seeing in wood products across your markets?
Sure, Mark. Unfortunately, the lumber market prices have dropped dramatically. We all witnessed those huge price increases over the past 2 years in lumber prices, but they've come down more than they went up over the last 2 years. So prices are now lower than they were 2 years ago. Demand for exports is down a fair amount. We do substantial business in China, and my customers there are telling me that they're having difficulty getting financing for their businesses. Some blame is placed on the administration over in China. And they're still buying some lumber, but again, the price is about half what it was just 2 years ago. And well, some good news is that container prices for shipping over to Asia and Europe are dropping. Our China rates have dropped at least $600 or $700 per container for shipping costs. If I'm going to make a prediction, and probably a wrong one, for markets for next year, because the grade valuable lumber or normally valuable lumber prices are so low, a lot of the production that would normally be called grade lumber is going into what's known as industrial lumber. This would normally be the lower priced item, but because grade lumber is so low, they're making a lot more railroad ties and pallet lumber and crating lumber, because they're paying more money than what would be normally have been a quality higher priced product. So supply of grade lumber will be going down because everyone's shipping their production over to industrial lumber. So I am predicting, throwing the dice and saying lumber prices will be going up, and demand hopefully will be going up. I've heard some rumors of change in some government policies over in China that might encourage increased demand as well.
Right, and Larry, at the Great Lakes, the Lake States Lumber Association meeting back in January, seems like longer than a year ago, but the presentation there from the American Hardwood Export Council talking about that China overall demand has just been dropping off considerably. There was such a large market, even though you're trying to go into other markets, it's not really making up for what just the usage of it had been in China anyway. So, but it seems like that dynamic is still carrying forward, isn't it?
Yeah, it used to be that about half of all of the grade lumber produced in the United States was exported. And of that half of lumber produced of grade lumber, China consumed half of that. So roughly 20 to 25% of all grade lumber was exported to China. That's gone down some. And now they're just worried about where supply will be going instead of China. But some other countries have picked up the pace a little bit. Hopefully China can get their economic house in order and make a regulatory environment that's more friendly to business over there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Larry. And just as an aside, so one of the areas that we're looking at when we're doing these trade promotion activities, whether it's trade shows, whether it's the trade mission that DATCAP will be doing to the UK in June, the trade ventures that WEDC does, I think those are all opportunity points for, well, for all products, but certainly in wood products, or several of those markets that we're going into, or where those opportunity points might be to help us get a greater share of those markets. So certainly to talk with yourself, but also the members of Lake States Lumber and all to be able to get us out there and see if we can grab a bit more of that share from other places.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to that trade show in Cologne. That should be interesting.
Oh, yes, the InterZoom show. Yeah, InterZoom.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, so moving from wood products, lumber, timber, some of the finished wood products. As I see the screen here, Charles, I see you online. Would you mind maybe sharing a bit about what you're seeing from perspective of kidney beans, pulses, and what's happening in your world markets?
Going back to the US dollar being strong, we've seen a lot of pressure in the EU concerning that, and Japan specifically. So it doesn't surprise me to see our numbers from Japan being down. I think Q4 of this year will be difficult, strictly from the standpoint that containers are harder to get again. And with delays in shipping, you won't see a lot of product hitting the EU before their extended Christmas break. So I know for a fact that our company is slowed way down because we won't hit that window to do it before. That may lead to an uptick in sales or uptick in receivables in Q1 as we go into next year. One of the biggest problems we faced is energy costs in the EU. They don't directly affect us, but anybody that's processing has been paying exponentially more for their energy since the invasion of Ukraine. And I think that will continue to play a role as we move forward. Accounts receivables have been getting out longer and longer, and that's in direct correlation to energy prices in the European Union. One thing I would say to the group again, and Lisa and I talked about this a little bit in Korea, is get out and talk to your members, get out and talk to your colleagues, get out and talk to everybody you may know. Between DATCAP and the Development Council and Midwest Food Exporters, there are a great number of trips happening through the second quarter of next year that you can take a part of. They're affordable and they carry a big punch. So get out there. There's grants. We need to educate everybody in the state about what's out there. Even as a long-term exporter, there's help to be found. So there's my predictions and my call for action.
Yep, talking away and on mute. Need to do that at least once a day, I think, these days. Thanks for that, Charles. And absolutely, and datcap.wi.gov, WDC.org, both are organizations through our websites. You're able to get at those and sign up for our newsletter. I know a number of the folks that are on this call are already signed up, but certainly to share that information with others, I think is helpful. And I do remember, Charles, that for Chippewa Valley Bean, you all 70% or so of your product is exported, and 70% of that goes to the EU. So those are important markets. Just a quick question: looking at Port Duluth and when you talk about containers and what's going on, shipping out through the Great Lakes, is that something that you see as being helpful for you in terms of transit times and costs? Maybe not obviously for the rest of this year, but as we roll into next year and then the year after, are you seeing some potential benefit from that activity?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're still moving full steam ahead on access to Great Lake ports. We met with the St. Lawrence Seaway people, I think last month, and talking about them opening up other Great Lake ports that could serve the Detroit area and the Chicago area, what that means for possibly getting service to Duluth or Superior, whether that's a destination service or whether that's a feeder ship. We are still working with the Lakers, the folks that are hauling the ore out of Superior and Duluth. And as far as I still know, they're retrofitting several ships that they can put then loaded containers on top of the full ore vessels and get us to destinations point east, whether that's Cleveland or elsewhere. So there's a lot actually happening for Great Lake, for what I consider some of our Great Lake ports. Unfortunately, I see Duluth pulling ahead versus any place in Wisconsin when it comes to containerized goods. But that in and of itself is still going to be a boon for Wisconsin, as it can release pressure on other shipping routes. Whether that's through Minneapolis, if we can ship more Minnesota product through Duluth, that relieves pressure on Minneapolis. And anything that comes out of the northern tier of the state moving that way, helps southern shippers through Chicago or elsewhere. So we're still it's slow going. 24 we'll see some relief. I believe by 25 everybody will have their ducks in a row and we'll really see some improvements. So hopeful, very hopeful for the future on those routes.
Excellent. No, thanks for that. And there have been some discussions about a container facility in Wisconsin, although the dollar price tag for those is, I guess, between 20 and 30 million. So, but something that I think as time goes on, and I think between what you're doing and what the DeLong terminal that's going up in Port Milwaukee that should be online 23. Now that's bulk, but those things can help maybe push that so that there's enough of that volume to make that economically viable for the state to have that, and I think can alleviate some of those problems, especially as we're looking at Europe and Northern Africa. So as key markets.
Well, and the biggest thing we're looking at is regularity, scheduled shipments, whether it's even if it was once a quarter or every other month. That would that's 800 containers that can leave the northern tier and move on a regular basis. That's just baby steps. But like I said, 24 and 25, we may see something happening in 23, but again, you're watching, federal grants go in at $7 million or $20 million at a time. And there's a lot of money flowing into Great Lake ports as these projects come through. And it's a matter of then putting in the work and getting equipment placed.
Absolutely. Oh, interesting. Good to hear. Thanks for that insight. Well, a few other folks on the line that I'm noticing. So I hope you don't mind. I'm just sort of pulling people out of the audience, but certainly raise your hand if you've got, something to mention. But Keith, at Eurus, the livestock and the genetics exports, would you mind maybe giving us a little bit of insight from that industry perspective, where you kind of see the year rounding out for you and where next year is looking like?
Yeah, sure, Mark. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know it's been a strong year for increase in growth in export sales. Interesting because there are certainly some challenges out there right now, because if I think around the world, three of the strongest markets that there have been of the last few years are China, Russia, and Brazil. And I think you can you just think about those three and they all, each one presents a challenge. And so Brazil has been at least for us, and I think for the whole industry, has been a real struggle. Sales are off there, and that makes a big impact. Russia presents us obviously unique challenge of even been able to do business there. And so that one, there's a lot of question marks for where that leads into next year. And, China's a little bit of the wild card too. Again, been a huge player for us on the genetic side, and taking a lot of product. Right now it continues to be that way. With all the political uncertainty, it's just really hard to tell on that and make a lot of predictions on how that one turns out. So those are three huge impactful markets for the whole industry, and how they go really drives a lot. I'd say if I look around the world on the rest of the markets, continue to be pretty strong. And obviously you showed the exchange rate, and that always has some impact on us, and doesn't help, but things have continued to be strong in spite of that. So that's a quick overview, Mark.
Great, thanks. And had the opportunity to meet your Africa person that you have in Africa to help grow that market. How is that? And I know that's a longer development, but what is Africa looking like for you in the longer term? Maybe not this year or next, but does that look like a market area that has some growth potential?
Well, the quick answer is yes. On that, and I'll just speak from a Euro standpoint on that one.
Sure.
We've put a significant amount of resources into growing the market, and that's not one that's going to happen quickly. It's a long-term project. In fact, in our case, we have a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for developing AI genetics in Eastern Africa, and are putting some significant resources into that, both the Gates Foundation and URUS, from that standpoint, to grow the market. But if you look around the world, and look at opportunities for increase in genetics market, that's one of the areas that we've just got to grow. I think if we want to expand it, there's 300 million cows on the continent of Africa. So you look at that compared to the number of lots of other places, there's lots of opportunity there, but it's going to take a long time to get it developed.
Sure, complicated markets. And Randy mentioned at the start, Krista Carnegie and I were part of that USDA led agricultural trade mission that went to Kenya and Tanzania.
Yeah.
So that's where we had the opportunity to talk, and they did talk about, on the one hand, opportunity, but with every 1 point on opportunity, there's about 3 points on challenges. So,
Yep.
So those are certainly longer term efforts, but areas that I think are of interest for us, not only for the livestock, genetic side, but also for feeds, supplements, and some of those products. So as we're seeing those opportunities, I think that there'll be some activity that we'll be looking to carry forward in that market. So good to have your input as we're moving forward on those things. And that's an industry that maybe we don't see as much about. We know about it in this state, but of course, a lot of the consumer products take up more of the time and attention because folks understand those a bit better.
Sure.
But certainly a strong and important industry for us in terms of the dollar volume, and in that meat category, that's a big chunk of really what we do in terms of our quote meat exports.
Yeah, sure is. Great.
Well, thanks for that. Among the companies, actually, I think David from Seneca, David Speck Boardman. If you are available to talk, whether you might give us a couple thoughts on where you see things going for exports in the area of prepared vegetables around the world. And I know one of the challenges has been the can stock, the steel, just for packaging in the first place, let alone the container and other challenges. But we've had some strength over the last year or so as we've looked at some of that category. But what are you seeing for the rest of this year and into next?
Okay, Hey,
Mark.
Oh, Mark, I was just going to say, this is David from Senator Ballwig's
Oh,
office.
oh,
We have
yeah.
Seneca in the district, but I
Sorry,
cannot
sorry.
speak for them, though.
No, I couldn't see the whole thing. I just saw
No,
Sen. and I
that's
thought,
fair.
oh, Seneca's on. But
Yeah.
sorry for that. Yeah.
No worries.
Okay. Well.
But I would like to point out the 14th Senate District has the most vegetable processing facilities in almost any district in the Midwest, actually. So,
Absolutely. Well, and it's a lot of those products. It's one of our top categories within
Yeah.
exports. So that's good to know. So sorry for that. I was
no worries, Mark.
assumed
worries.
things. So
Mark, can you hear me okay? This is actually Kevin Lips with Seneca Foods.
oh, Kevin, sorry.
Yeah.
Because it's on the iPhone. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
We got the wrong
And
guy.
my apologies for the iPhone and the
Yeah,
sound
no
perhaps
worries.
coming in and out. I've been actually at the PLNA show in Chicago for the first time in 3 years. It just
Oh, wow.
completed here yesterday. So I'm just traveling back, stopping in Janesville for a quick visit at our headquarters.
Oh, great. So, thanks for that. And sorry for the confusion here so what are you seeing, if you're able to, grab the crystal ball that you carry with you and see what the rest of the year looks like, and maybe what you're thinking about, next year. Demand's strong, but, we've got some headwinds with, containers and dollar value in other markets.
Yeah. And you're really spot on regarding the tin plate acquisition and the ability to acquire that, bring it into Baraboo, Wisconsin, so we can make the cans that we need for our vegetables, make them every day of the year. Getting a hold of that tin plate, as required from U.S. processors has not been easy. And even though raw steel is falling, general tin plate pricing is remaining the same. So as far as our inputs for costing, whether it be land costs, whether it be the tin plate costs, even labor, with some of the inflationary discussions, we expect our harvest for 2023 to be pretty consistent to where it is right now. Certainly not falling, certainly not rising. But again, we're still 3-4 months away from being able to know exactly how we're going to be sitting as far as how we'll quote the season. But overall, inventories worldwide are varied. In Asia, both retail and food service usage is pretty soft. Their inventories are high. They might even have enough inventory to last them for another 12 months. And that'll put us into a difficult spot today. But come next year's harvest, they might need a full year's crop. So we could actually think of our Asian volumes as almost doubling next year. Yeah, where they're quiet right now, they will spike. Outside of Asia, throughout Latin America, throughout the European Union, we're seeing really good movement. Our vegetables are still a value. They're still desired by almost every country that is looking for them. And so our volumes are strong, whether it be Colombia, whether it be the Dominican. The strong dollar certainly is a weight, but usage is still there. We're still the value product. We just had one of my colleagues complete a trip within the UK, Finland, and up through Norway. Volumes there remain strong. So on the vegetable processing, we run quite a few of those plants that were just mentioned, and we're doing pretty good internationally.
It's good. So general takeaway is you look for a fairly decent year, maybe not a banner year this year, but strong, and then relatively positive for next year, maybe a little bit light in the first quarters, but then it'll catch up if Asia eats through their inventory and needs to reorder. That timing will work out that toward the end of 23, then that they'll pick back up is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that would be a true statement. The variable will be, I'm sure everybody has seen that the European Union had a really drastic drought this year. And so their ability to produce was impacted, which basically makes our extremely favorable Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois weather conditions this year for growing sweet corn, which was one of the best years I've seen, kind of an anomaly. Everywhere else, our main competition in Hungary, France, those were all impacted by either the war or weather. If you look at the other greatest competitive threat is Thailand. Thailand had some heavy rains that impacted some of the Asian needs. And so even though some of those customers have been soft, they're looking for it, whether that's a short-term assistance or a long-term partnership. We don't know. I suspect that some of these lower cost producers are going to they're going to be taking advantage of the situation that our pricings are a little bit elevated just based upon the tin plate pressures that we have.
Sure. So not so much on the product going into the can, but the can itself.
Exactly. We are at a disadvantage in that aspect. And, you know, to comment on container availability, we actually are seeing some favorable availability. You know, we just got off the phone here about an hour ago with an opportunity to do 10 containers into Colombia, and we can get them out in less than 2 weeks if we needed to.
Wow. Which, so that's good, because we were hearing, of course, early in the year and at the end of last year, that containers were just this unbelievable bottleneck and constraint. So, and we have been hearing in the news somewhat that it's getting better for some folks in some areas of the state, but not every.
To put it in perspective, that same Colombian customer ended up moving about 60 containers of product over the road to Miami just to get containers to go down to Colombia during that difficult time frame. You know, and if that was $4,000 to $5,000 a container added cost unnecessarily, that was a huge impact for them just to get around the container availability issues that we had up here, which today are improved.
Wow. So they drove from Miami. They had them stocked there in Miami. They actually drove them through the US, down through Mexico and into Colombia. Is that?
No. That would be basically loading up a semi truck here in the Midwest, driving it down to Miami just so they can load it in the container down there.
Because of
But then you're buying pallets, you're doing over the road trucking fees, and it was almost $250,000 unnecessary money spent on canned corn going to Colombia from Wisconsin.
Wow. Which, drives up to the price then to the consumer. Certainly, it makes us more or less competitive. You know, on our trips, we try to go in as we do these trade missions. If we've got a trade show and we have the opportunity, we'll do what we call a supermarket safari a little bit, where we'll just go in and see what those items are. And noticing, for example, in Kenya and Tanzania, that there was a lot of canned vegetables that were coming out of Thailand, as you noted. And then quite a bit out of Europe. So at least in that particular market, Eastern Africa, those two, then we noticed that we don't have as much of a entry there, perhaps, as some of the other parts of the world. So certainly opportunity points have been seen. Great. Well, thank you, Kevin, for the information on the prepared vegetables, those canned vegetables. I know it's an important category for us out of the state, and you're one of the major, certainly major producers and exporters in that area. As I look at the rest of the folks, are there other exporters on the line, and certainly, from Chad, from Dairy Farmers Wisconsin. I don't know if Rebecca's still with us, whether we're hearing from dairy industry exporters where they're seeing things happening. Not seeing just in the list of folks here if we've got any exporters from those areas. Right. And so Brian Cummins, I see you're on the line. I know that we talked a bit, it was a while back at the ginseng harvest that we did up in Wausau, and the opportunity for ginseng into your distilled craft spirits. And at the time we talked about that potentially the opportunity for export in distilled and craft spirits could be more of an opportunity even than being able to sell in Wisconsin, just given the challenges with the distribution that we have in the state. So didn't know if you might want to some thoughts around that, both for yourself, but also for the industry overall, what efforts might be going on, and we could talk a bit about what plans we've got in terms of our trade activities in some of these markets that we've been visiting.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. I'm also here as a representative of the Craft Beverage Coalition, the brewers, distillers, and wineries in the state. And, we have not met as an organization over the last couple of quarters. That tends to be our festival season, where people kind of go and work in their businesses rather than meeting and planning and strategizing. I did, however, present to the groups via email about the small and medium export program that we had talked about earlier. I don't know that anyone took you up on that, but certainly I want to keep that in front of people because every little bit counts, and those seeds of small export programs can really help to grow a business. The other factor that's impacting our business, and I heard a little bit of that through the canned vegetable people, is packaging supply chain is still an issue. Glass, particularly, whether it's domestic glass or imported glass for packaging our products. I know even though we're in a transition right now in opening a new facility as Great Northern Distilling, we really can't entertain an expansion in our products just because of access to that. So I'm working on new supplies, and I know everyone else is as well, trying to secure allocations for 2023. So that's going to impact anybody looking to grow an export program.
Sure, absolutely. And it does take a couple of years to kind of get but yeah, if you've got even you get lucky and get a big order from the get-go, then you're not able to deliver on it. That could kill the deal for the future, because then if you can't deliver in that time, then they just don't come back to you.
And from a personal standpoint, you brought up the ginseng whiskey that we produce. And while we have not reestablished the export program for that kind of died at the trade war time in 2018,
Sure.
and is still something I'm interested in expanding. We're finding success for that domestically on the West Coast. We have a few retailers in California that have picked this up in the respective Chinese American communities there, and we're seeing excellent growth in that.
That's interesting you say that. And so one of the things that we're doing, besides the larger scale activities in the Wisconsin Initiative for Ag Exports, so those trade show things that we've mentioned, like, for example, the trade mission that we're planning, secretary-led trade mission in June of 23, the last part of June of 23, where we believe that craft and distilled spirits are an opportunity there in the UK. So certainly within the organization to see about those folks who might be interested in going there. But so Jennifer Liu on the team and she's actually in Europe right now at the Eurotier show. That's livestock genetics feeds. But she also works with ginseng. It's one of the specialty products that she covers. So utilizing a small bit of those funds to extend. So for example, we're working with the Softwood Export Council and doing some activities and those are funded by them. So these federal funding sources and U.S. livestock genetics export, et cetera. Now they have their particular product areas that they're covering, but then we're able to extend the trip by a day or 2 days in order to assess other markets and look at other opportunities, make connections. So specific to ginseng, that in a couple of those locations that Jennifer had been meeting with the distributors of importers of ginseng products. So that's an area where we could look at the Chinese diaspora. So, and aside from Taiwan and China, the obvious locations for some of those, in many of those other markets, Mexico City is an example. You wouldn't think about Mexico City, but there's quite a large Chinese population there, and a lot of those herb shops and Chinese traditional medicine shops. But there's also that interest in consumption of those items, like the ginseng in the whiskey or in the vodka products or potentially other products. So I think those are opportunities that we're able to use those Wisconsin Initiative for Ag Export funds, not only for those large scale projects, but also filling in those other pieces that help us move the needle in more specialty ways. around the world. So certainly we'll engage with your group here to see about how we can get more of, as I can see the products behind you there, more of those bottles on the shelves in locations around the world, because we know there's demand and other countries are certainly meeting it. We should have a share of that cocktail glass.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
So yeah, glad to do that. Chad, I know, this is the busy season for a lot of the folks, the cheesemakers, certainly, the holiday is a big part of the year for a lot of those folks. So I can well understand that they're busy making cheese and getting things packaged so they can actually ship product. But didn't know if you might have a comment or two on where just a general, where you see what you hear from the folks who are exporters that in terms of what this year's looking like.
Yeah, once again, it's all anecdotal, but it seems to be going really well. I mean, the numbers are up. The issues seem to be softening, and overall it looks pretty good. I think to me the even stronger sign is that our folks going out and meeting with some of the smaller organizations that really haven't done exporting, and the way that they're leaning in and actually starting to get the wheels spinning to start moving product outside the country. There's a handful of those companies that, a year ago wouldn't even considered it. And now they're actually, the wheels are turning to make it happen. So I think the programs that the state's leaning in and helping with and getting the word out about, the importance of exports and making it and helping them push the easy button to get this stuff done is really starting to work. But it's in terms of specifics, I'm not in a position to really provide.
Sure, no,
that stuff.
totally.
But generally the feelings are pretty good. I mean, Ciala went really well, and from a cheese perspective, I think things are as good as they've ever been.
Well, and certainly the year-to-date Q3 numbers bear that out. I mean, that's I think the takeaway that we've had from this in the last few times we've been reporting that you would have expected lower numbers just given everything you hear about in the news, the inflation, the container shortages, the logistics costs, the strong dollar, conflict in Ukraine, et cetera. You would expect all the numbers to be down, but that it seems like that demand, and Kevin spoke to it a little bit in terms of the inventories, for example, that they're high in Asia, but in other parts of the world not. And so it's pulling through that product, and certainly push at least overcoming those challenges. But imagine if we had the raw materials, if we had the packaging, if we didn't have the strong dollar, where that might be. Even so, because that demand sounds like it's still quite strong.
Yeah, and I think part of it, Mark, is that at least with a lot of the cheese guys, their products are unique. They're not just shipping bulk commodity. And it's harder to second source a lot of that product. And so regardless, I think that's really helping us a lot with some of the headwinds that we're facing, at least for now. I mean, if it continues to be harsh, they will find secondary sources, but it isn't that easy to replace a lot of especially some of the branded products, and then a lot of the products that are used for ingredients for specific recipes. It's not like you can just flip out one cheese for the other and keep everything the same.
Sure. So it's certainly an advantage for that manufacturer, but then also the challenge if there's nothing else to replace, or then it gets replaced entirely, then it's hard to get back in again.
Yep.
So, and I think the consensus is, and we've heard this from industry organizations, we've seen some of the reporting on it, that this year, at least for this basket of products, seems like we'll finish out fairly strong. Certainly above last year, maybe not the same percentage increase that we had over the previous year, but we had a record year last year. So it's still going to be, looks like from all those indicators, pretty good. But then also, I think what we're hearing today and heard from others is that it will be a softer year next year.
Yep.
So hopefully not a decline, but certainly not these strong growth rates that we've seen throughout this year across all categories. Maybe a few might do okay, but not everybody.
Well, the good news is that's just a projection, and the reality always comes in and hits us. Hopefully it'll hit us in a good way.
Yes, I hope I'm wrong in a good way. Right. That's or that the predictions, not me, but the predictions are wrong in a good way. Well, we're about 10 minutes away from where we were thinking to be in time on this. I don't know if anyone else had some comments to make or anything you'd like to add or questions you might have on something. What I'll do really quickly here, bring the screen back up again. So hopefully you're seeing the PowerPoint. So I just want to talk about the next meetings. We've got 2 more of these webinars planned, at least in the near term, and that we'll look to. I think the consensus is from the group that these are beneficial sessions, but we also want to make sure that the topics are of interest and the information useful for those attending. So 11 January, both these are all on Wednesdays. So Wednesday, 11 January, Wednesday, 15 February, 9 a.m. And we're looking for topics for those meetings. And so anyone on the line here or through the organizations to send a message to either Lisa Stout or myself, Chad or Charles, in order to get that information out so we can make sure that these are beneficial for you. But in our conversations before, folks felt that this is a good use of our time to be able to have this information and share it. And then the next Wisconsin Agricultural Export Advisory Council meeting, that's on the 29th, again, a Wednesday, 29 March, 9 a.m. Those tend to go a little bit longer just because we have a broader range. And in that meeting, we will have the year-end data that will have just come out that first week in March. So by the end of March, we'll have had the information available to really see how the year is finished up for us. With that, I think we're about ready to close out. We're at that adjourn point in the agenda, but Charles and Chad, do you want to make a comment or two before we closed out and went on with the rest of our day?
Yeah, just quickly, for our next for the next actual board meeting, just want to remind everybody how important it is to sit face to face and to be able to have these conversations in person to talk about what we can do as a group and how to move forward. I want to reinforce what Mark said about how we feel about these intermittent webinars. They can be of great value. We just, the message needs to go out to the people that need to hear it, about what's available, what's being done, and how that can affect everybody moving forward to, follow our mission of increasing ag exports in the state of Wisconsin. So get out, spread the gospel, spread the good news, and there are so many resources available. Let's get people to hear them. Chad, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. I just make sure that if you have content that you want for one of these upcoming webinars, please pipe up. I mean, we have some ideas, but things that come directly from the folks that are on this call or from people that or issues that need help resolving, or ways that we can help get the word out to make, to bring in a broader group of ag exporters, to give them information and data and support that they need to help grow. That's really what this is all about.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Charles and Chad. And I'll make one more announcement, I guess. In addition to the Export Expansion Grant, which is for nonprofit organizations to benefit dairy meat crop exporters, there is also the International Market Access Grant. That's the program that WDC has run for several years, and that funds from the Wisconsin Initiative for Agricultural Exports are also contributing to that in order to support the dairy, meat, and crop product exporters. And that program is ongoing. Their application period opens up in August and then shuts down. They close it out in order to do all the underwriting and processing by that last week in March. So that's still open. That's $10,000 per state fiscal year per company. If you're not an Export Tech graduate, then you have 3 opportunities for that $10,000 amount. If you go through the Export Tech program, then you have 6 opportunities for $25,000. So it's a successful program. It's been running for quite some time, extremely beneficial, and it really is for the companies to enter or expand in new markets. So whether you're an exporter yourself, whether you are connected with other exporters, folks, your suppliers, your customers, whoever that who is a Wisconsin operation company, doesn't need to be headquartered here. But those funds can help to do trade shows and register your trademarks and register your IP. It's an extremely broad range of items that it actually supports for you to directly grow your business overseas. So we'd want to make sure we get that message out, because there are funds available in that program to apply, and we want to make sure that we use every dollar of that in order to help folks grow their business.
Hey, Mark, can we add the link to that? To the end of this deck, or someplace that we can, because once again, I think there's a lot of companies that, every time you get reminded, you think of different companies that could really jump in on this thing.
Sure, absolutely. As we're talking, I'll just real quickly get it. It's on the WDC pages, but I'll
Okay, great.
Because it's their program, and certainly they can contact us here at DATCAP as well, and we can get them connected up with that, help to explain the program, and also help to give them some idea of what projects that the activities that they might do for that. So let me.
Great.
National Market Access Grant, just found it. Let me grab it real quick here, and we'll drop it into the chat. Make sure it's going to everybody.
Great, thank you.
Everyone. Go. Great. So it's WDC.org, and it's a Global Business Development Program is what it's called. But let me just hit that. So there it is in the chat. Yep, certainly. Or if nothing else, it's either $10,000 or $25,000 for export. Get a hold of the people at DATCAP, and we'll get you, or the folks at WDC for that matter. But whoever get a hold of us, and we'll absolutely plug you into that program, because we want to make sure that we get the maximum utilization of those funds. And it helps. There are normally 30 to 40 companies annually that utilize this program. So we want to make sure that everyone's got access to it. Well, great. If nothing else, then we're just about at the time that we'd had carved out for this activity, for this conversation. Really appreciate everyone's willingness to share some information about your business and what we're doing, and look forward to seeing you at the next interim webinar, the Wisconsin Agricultural Export webinar in January.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you
Thanks,
very much,
Mark.
everybody.
Take care. We'll see you. See you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good holidays.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks.